Hello everyone! So a little while ago, I stumbled upon this amazing site called FontShare. If you haven't heard of it, it's an awesome free platform offering high quality fonts for designers and developers. What's great about FontShare is that all the fonts are completely free to use, even for commercial projects, and they have a fantastic collection of modern fonts that are perfect for web design. The font I picked was Melodrama. It looked amazing, but implementing it into my site wasn't as smooth as I expected. Let's jump into what happened. Alright, so download it by clicking the download button. FontShare packages everything in a neat zip file. So once the download was finished, I went ahead and extracted the files. Before we jump into the font setup, I want to quickly show you how I have my project structured. For this project, I'm using Vite as my build tool. Vite is amazing because it's super fast and makes setting up CSS files really easy. Now, when it comes to CSS, I've already created 4 CSS files to keep things organized. Let me walk you through them briefly. Modern normalize.css. This file applies a modern normalization of default browser styles, making sure everything looks consistent across browsers. Next, this is my CSS reset file, which completely removes any default browser styling, so I can build my own styles from scratch. This is the main style sheet, where all my global styles will go. Finally, utils.css contains utility classes, which I'll use for quick fixes or repetitive styling, like margins and paddings. Let's get back to adding the font. So after downloading and extracting the font from FontShare, I created a fonts folder in the public directory, and then dropped the TFF file right in there. Now that the fonts are in my project, the next step is to use font face in CSS to actually load the font onto the website. Before it, let's make a heading. Now let's run the project using the npm rundev command. Since I'm using Vite, the development server will start instantly, and it's running on port 5173. And there you go, we've got our heading showing up. Next, we'll implement our custom font using font face. Okay, now let's jump into the style.css file. First, we'll add the @font_face rule. Inside this rule, we need 2 key properties, font family and src. The font family is the name we're giving the font, and src is the location of the font file. In this case, I'm naming the font Melodrama, and I'm linking to the TFF file. Now let's apply this font to the h1 tag. As you can see, I'm applying the custom font using font family. And there we go, the font has successfully changed. But just to make it a little more obvious, let's increase the font size to 300 pixel so we can really see it. Next, let's play around with the font weight. Many fonts offer different weights, typically ranging from 300 to 700. But before we do that, I want to update the heading text variable. Alright, now let's head back to the CSS and adjust the font weight. We'll start by setting the font weight to 300, which is on the lighter side. As you can see, the font has changed to a much lighter weight, and it looks exactly like what we saw on FontShare. Now let's try using the WOFF file. WOFF is optimized for the web and generally offers better performance, so it's a good idea to use it whenever possible. First, we'll go back to the extracted font files. Select the WOFF file and drop it into our project's fonts folder. With that done, let's head back to our style.css file and implement the WOFF file. I'll start by changing the previous @font_face rule to use the TTF version of the font. I'll make a copy of the @font_face rule and modify it for the WOFF file. I'll rename the font family to Melodrama WOFF and update the src to point to the WOFF file. Great, let's add 2 headings to see the difference. I'll create one heading with a class of with TTF to use the TTF file, and another with a class of with WOFF for the WOFF file. Back to the style file to apply the font family for these classes. Let's head back to the browser, and as you can see, both headings look exactly the same at first glance. Both the TTF and WOFF fonts are rendering just fine. But here's where things get interesting. While they may look the same initially, they behave differently when we start changing properties, like width. Let's see what happens when we adjust the width next. Alright, before we dive into changing the width, first I adjust the appearance a little. Now that the fonts are easier to see, let's try changing the width of these headings. I'll set the width to 700 for both fonts, and we'll compare how they behave. Take a look. Now you can really see the difference. The TTF font still looks crisp and uniform, but check out the WOFF version. It's starting to behave differently. In the WOFF font, even the thin areas are getting thicker as we adjust the width. Pretty strange. At first I thought the issue was with my browser. Maybe my version of Chrome wasn't compatible with WOFF fonts, so I double-checked my Chrome version. But everything was up to date. No problem there. So what could it be? My next thought was that something in my CSS setup might be causing the issue. Specifically, I wondered if the modern normalization or reset files were interfering with the font rendering. I decided to remove both files temporarily to see if that made a difference. But nope, the problem was still there. Removing those files didn't fix the issue, and the WOFF font still didn't behave as expected. I decided to try a completely different font to see if the issue was specific to the font I was using. I found another font called Bosca and thought, let's see if the same thing happens with this one. So I downloaded the Bosca font, put it into my project, and updated the add font face rule in style to implement this new font. Now let's check it out in the browser. And yep, the problem is still there. The thicker parts of the font are getting even thicker, just like with the previous font. So it's clear that this issue isn't specific to one font. It happens with WOFF fonts when adjusting the width. After struggling with the WOFF file, I decided to try using the WOFF2 format instead. WOFF2 is a newer, more efficient format. I've now changed the WOFF file to WOFF2 in the add font face rule, and let's check it out in the browser. And look at that. The issue we saw with the WOFF file isn't happening here with WOFF2. The font looks and behaves just as expected, even when we adjust the width. So here's a comparison between the three fonts, TTF, WOFF, and WOFF2. As you can see, the WOFF file still looks strange, but TTF and WOFF2 don't have that same issue. It handles the resizing perfectly. Even after trying WOFF2, I was still curious about what was happening with the WOFF file, so I decided to take a different approach. Import specific font weights for light, regular, and bold, instead of using a variable font. In the index HTML file, I updated the class names of the three headings to light, regular, and bold so we can apply the specific font weights. Next, I created three separate add font face rules in style CSS, each one targeting a specific font weight, light, regular, and bold. I then applied these fonts to the corresponding headings in style CSS. Now, let's check it in the browser. Everything looks as expected. Each heading displays its correct weight. Problem solved. By importing the specific font weights, the WOFF file works without any issues. But let's make sure. I'm going to comment out the three add font face rules and create a single rule that imports the variable WOFF file, melodrama variable. Then I'll apply different font weights to the headings again to see if the issue returns. And the problem is back. The thin areas are getting thicker again. So the conclusion here is clear. When using WOFF, importing specific font weights works well, but using a variable WOFF font can lead to issues when adjusting widths. So to wrap things up, here's what I discovered. While the WOFF format is widely recommended for the web due to its smaller file size and better compression, it can sometimes behave unpredictably, especially when adjusting font widths. The solution I found: import specific font weights instead of relying on a variable WOFF file. This ensures that your fonts render correctly. I hope this video helps if you ever run into similar issues in your projects. If you have any questions or want to share your own experiences, drop a comment below. And if you found this helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.